Are you looking for affordable office space in Marion? The professional building located at 685 Delaware Avenue is the place for you. For more information, call 740-383-6803. Office space is now available. Again, telephone number 740-383-6803. This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Scott Spears Now. Today, the guest, a man who has been weaving in and out of our lives since 1963, when he started as the apprentice on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. He was the apprentice of Marlin Perkins. 50 years later, he's still with us as Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom turns 50 years old. Of course, I speak of zoologist Jim Fowler. Jim, over the years, not only did Wild Kingdom, but he did Johnny Carson, he did The Today Show, and a slew of other programs, including Conan O'Brien. In this episode, Jim talks about what he's up to these days, the 50th anniversary of Mutual of Omaha, and all kinds of other things. A guy I like a whole lot, the animal expert, Jim Fowler. This is Scott Spears, and can you imagine that this year, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom turns 50? 50, that's unbelievable. Joining us is a man who was there at the inception and has been welcomed into your homes ever since, very happily. He is Jim Fowler. Jim, how are you doing? You're looking great.
Well, I'm doing great. You know, I'm just getting started. I got a few years on me, but I'm still getting started.
Jim, before we get into the interview and talk about Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, I want to let the viewers know just how busy you are. You're on location right now. You're not in your home. You're on location in an area. Tell us about it.
Well, I'm at the Tanganyika Wildlife Park it's near Wichita, Kansas. I think it's in Goddard, Kansas, or whatever it is. But I'm out here because they're having a zoo day, and I have to speak at this banquet tonight. I get hooked into doing quite a bit of that with zoological parks, but it's fun because my main goal in life right now is to learn how to reconnect families and children with the world of nature. Why is the existence of the natural world important to human welfare? That's what I talk a lot about today.
Jim, how did we become unconnected?
I think we became unconnected. It has a lot to do with economics, as you probably know. That's the driving force, the engine of a lot of different things. But I think we got reconnected because we've designed so many activities that are appealing to people that we didn't do a very good job of promoting why the natural world is important to people. And I think that's probably it. We can work on the internet, we can play golf, one of the biggest competitions with us going out in nature is, of course, shopping malls. A lot of people exercise in shopping malls today. So we got to work a lot harder in trying to influence public that how we maintain nature on this planet is extremely important to us.
Jim, I know there's a lot of steps I would imagine in the speech you're going to give tonight, but just a little sample for us right now. What is one way we could reconnect, and why is it so important?
Okay, I'll try to say that in a nutshell. You know, I used to talk a lot about animals. I lectured all over the country even before Wild Kingdom, and I would carry an animal around with me, anything from a cheetah to a golden eagle to a harpy eagle, and that's the way you got attention. I had a lot of funny things happen doing that, but I also had a cheetah named Arthur that I lectured with, and two giant anteaters named Lawrence and Florence. But that would sort of break the ice, and then I would tell them about the habits of animals, the behavior, and all that sort of thing. And I think over the years I've evolved. I've always been interested in education. And I've, as a zoologist, I started realizing that communication is the name of the game for the 21st century. We'd have to learn to communicate. So I've gone from that to talking much more about what's in it for us. We humans are very self-possessed, you might say, but we've got to start talking about what's in it for us, for nature. Now, I even have tried to design some arguments as to why open space, wildlife, and wilderness is important to humans. It all starts with economics. You know, nature tourism, nature-based tourism, we call it ecotourism, is a huge earner of money for people. Tourism is the #2 industry in America for generating income, generating money, funds for communities, for example. It filters down into the gas stations, the restaurants, the motels. Anytime you go to a national park or any park, it has tremendous economic value. That's one thing. Economics are always one of the greatest incentives. The second incentive is rather interesting. We humans have got to start talking about quality of life. How does the natural world affect our human quality of life? Those of you who lived in a city for a lot of times, that's a little bit compressed there in the city sometimes. And when you overcrowd, there's a basic law of nature says that if you overcrowd too much, there's a tipping point, and you don't necessarily benefit from that overcrowding. We've got to learn that if you can get in the outdoors and you can take your family, let's say, up a creek and have a picnic and enjoy nature, or go bird watching, go hunting, fishing, camping, canoeing, all those other things, it helps your quality of life. But we don't even talk about quality of life. You know, in Eastern Germany years ago, there's no way you could go up a creek and have a picnic with your family because the creeks were all polluted and the rivers were. But we need to maintain the natural world, so we have a place, first of all, that's utterly real. You talk about reality television, I don't see anything real on that at all. But the natural world is a reality that you can keep pace with. But the third argument, I think, is even more important. There's now a group in Washington. I was the master of ceremonies at a big meeting that the International Conservation Caucus, it was the Congressional Conservation Caucus. There were quite a few senators there. But anyway, they talked about, the theme was natural security. Now think about that. The countries that are always where the greatest social tragedies are occurring are those countries that have destroyed their natural resources. They're either low on land, or they can't support the species. That's another law that talked about. It used to be the land would support the people, but in a lot of countries like Haiti, they've cut down practically every tree in Haiti, so there's social unrest there. And look at Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq was the cradle of civilization. They've lost 4 civilizations because they've exceeded the capacity, the land to support the species in that case. Afghanistan used to be green. Now a goat can hardly make a living. Those are some of the arguments why it's important to humans that I talk about.
You know, Jim, I was thinking about this the other day, and I know a lot of times, and certainly well-deserved, the reason that kids are obese and don't go out and play anymore and get out is it gets late at video games and cell phones and internet. And like I say, I'm very sure that that's true, but here on the East Coast, where 6 months a year it's cold, 6 months a year it's warm, I think one of the reasons people don't go outside is air conditioning.
Down in Georgia, that may be something. Well, the point is that sitting around is bad for you. And a lot of people don't realize that the outdoor is full of adventure. I do a park called an ecological park, and that's not a zoo, but it's an open area. And I combine adventure with education in my parks, so that adventure draws people away from a shopping mall. But you got to get them there and then give them a good exposure to the natural world. You know, there are 140 million people that go to zoological parks in America every year, and not one of the parks that I know even talk about the linkage between human welfare and how we treat the earth. It wasn't on the campaign of a politician from a county commissioner to the President of the United States. We don't have that as a major component of the platform. The reason is that they've done surveys And they found out that less than 5% of the American public spend more than a half an hour a year thinking about the welfare of open space, wildlife, and wilderness. We've got so many other activities that are being marketed to us economically and, professionally, that we've got to start competing, those of us who understand that how we treat this earth is the most important thing that we could ever have on a political campaign.
Very well put, Jim. I want to get into Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
Does it feel like 50 years?
No, it doesn't. In fact, I'm just sort of getting started. But Johnny Carson used to say that I was the only person that Marlin Perkins could find who was dumb enough to say to do what he said to do. There's a certain amount of truth there. Johnny used to kid a lot about that. And by the way, no, it doesn't feel that way. I have to be careful what I wrestle these days. I usually will pick up an old alligator, not a fairly young one. No, it's all what you know, and it's all about your fascination with the world around you. And so I still feel about the same way that I did.
How did Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom start?
Oh, very interesting. I went to a college in Indiana called Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana. It was a Quaker school. I grew up in the Quaker tradition. It's called the Society of Friends, and my father was a Quaker. But anyway, this college was a liberal arts college called Earlham College, and I think I mentioned that. But the point is, I had a disease at Earlham College. I caught a disease. Some of you listening may have that disease. But anyway, my disease was that nobody told me what I couldn't do. Now, if I want a rousing applause, I say that at some lecture I'm giving, and I say that, that's the way America used to be. Thank God, I hope it still is, and people are rousing applause. That is the way America used to be. We used to be able to dream, and often we could actually succeed in our dreams. But I went off to Africa in my 20s, and I lived with the Kalahari Bushmen. I trained animals for a movie, and I got some success at that, so it gave me the confidence. You need a little confidence, self-esteem, so I went off to the Amazon and studied the largest eagle in the world and never been studied before, called the harpy. That's a monkey-eating eagle that is sort of not above eating 30-pound monkeys. So I took the harpy on the Today Show. When I got back to the States, I trapped several of these for lecturing. They're a 20-pound eagle. They're much bigger than the golden eagles. And I was on with Dave Garraway. Some people may remember him. And Marlin Perkins was watching that. And he and Don Meyer, the producer of Wild Kingdom, called me and said, would I come to Chicago with those eagles? And by the way, I had two anteaters named Lawrence and Florence. I had a big 18-foot python, or was it an anaconda? And then I had I had giant anteaters, and I had all kinds of things. And I drove up in my old French Citroën, which is a strange-looking car. But when I arrived in Chicago, I thought Marlin Perkins maybe thought he made a mistake because I had to hose my car out pretty badly. But that was the first show on Wild Kingdom and the pilot film. And they wanted me to fly this big harpy eagle and loose in Lincoln Park in Chicago. Well, I didn't like the idea of the harpy soaring around Chicago looking in baby carriages, an eagle that eats 30-pound monkeys, So I wanted to fly it on the end of a line called a creance the first time. I was flying it on this creance, but the eagle can't look back and say he's tied. He's doing it. I could fly him loose, but in a park like that, I had to be careful. So the Associated Press were there, and they had a camera, and the cameramen were shooting my eagle in slow motion. It was great because my eagle would fly over and land on my fist. So I said, well, let me try once again. So I did this, and the eagle got halfway to me and then veered off to the left. I looked over. There was a little old lady with a little white fluffy poodle on the end of the leash. And I wasn't too sure because the lady had the same hairdo as the poodle, but I wasn't sure which one the eagle was going after. The Associated Press photographer had a look of glee on his face because he knew he was going to get a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph. If that eagle had caught the dog or the lady, I would have been sent back to Georgia. But as it was, I rescued, and the woman disappeared. I can hear her now. How she got in through the security tape, I don't know. But she left in a hurry, and I could hear her at the local ladies club later on saying, you know, I was walking little Fluffy in the park, and a giant pterodactyl came out of the sky. Anyway, I'm sure she was surprised by it. But that's how it started off. And I went ahead for, 30 years with Marlin. I was gone for a few years, but I came back in the 80s, and I was on all the shows from then on.
What was Marlin Perkins like, Jim?
Marlin Perkins was a very astute, traditional zoo director. He had all the original style that zoo directors had, very professional. Marlin was an enthusiastic student of nature, and he was excited everywhere he went because he was doing what he wanted. And you know, the biggest tribute to Marlin, I went on a lot of expeditions with Marlin. In fact, he and I were joined in his family sometimes. We'd go looking for fossils below St. Louis in an old gravel pit. Anyway, Marlin was the kind of guy, I never heard Marlin Perkins complain about anything that was going on in all those years. He was very comfortable with what he was doing, and he was enjoying every minute of it. And I think that's one of the best tributes. We were in some pretty awkward situations at times, but that's Marlin. He was an astute, very knowledgeable, very enthusiastic zoo director.
If you had to describe Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom's mission, what you and Marlin intended to do in the early days, what would you have told somebody?
Well, you know, we started out, Don Meyer was a very knowledgeable producer. He'd gotten people like Dave Garroway and Hugh Downs and all those people. You know, Chicago used to be the center of television, and then it moved over to New York and also the West Coast. But he was one of the original producers, and he had the integrity and the astuteness that to use adventure as one of our hooks, because we were playing on weekends opposite things like football and others. There were only 3 networks in those days. So we had to do a little capture, wrestle, and tag. That's where I came in to compete with some of those other shows for that time period. But Don was, he was also very, very knowledgeable about how to handle finances. He was good at that. But he also understood how to keep the attention of an audience. He knew that every 15 minutes he had to have a break, a commercial break. So he would build to the action, and then he would have to cut and start another action. So he was very good at how he programmed it. I think what happened is that without knowing it, it was not that planned. We did have an ending to the show that we didn't preach, but it was fairly obvious, our point at the end of the program. We were showing what was happening around the world. For wardens, we work with wardens, and we work with institutions and all like that. And we would research each program. I had already been to Africa, so I knew a lot of things going on there. But Don Meyer knew how to make it and exciting and keep the audience's attention. And by the way, I spoke in state of Washington and Oregon a while back to about 300 wildlife biologists. And about 75% of those biologists, when they were questioned, said that they went into that field because of Wild Kingdom and watching me. So that's a real reward. But we didn't preach, but we were obviously enthusiastic about what we were doing. And I think that helped too, make people realize it was an exciting field to be involved with and to learn about.
How did the appearances come about, Jim, on the Today Show and Johnny Carson? How did those filter in?
Well, here's the point. I hope that I did not act foolish on the shows. There's some people now that think they should take an animal out and try to make it dangerous or scare the host. I never had to do any of that with Johnny. I was his straight man. And I remember I used to have to turn down appearances on that program with the people that booked the show, the program directors, because I wanted to make sure I had an animal on that could be interesting to the public. That was one of my challenges, and that's something I could talk about. But Johnny was one of the rare hosts of a show that he never tried to be funny. Johnny didn't do that. Johnny let Don Rickles or my animals do something, then he would relate to it. He was so quick that I had to focus on listening to everything he said and blanking out the audience. It was only when I heard the audience have belly laughs that I realized that things were going pretty well. So I had to be sort of his straight guy. And Johnny, I got to know Johnny pretty well. And that one.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Wild Scott Spears Now, maybe we'll call it. Jim Fowler, always a great guest, always love having him on. He is truly a guy who is concerned about the world, animals, the outdoors, and educating us. I can't thank him enough for coming on, and I hope he comes back with us in the future. A very talented man. Thank you, Jim. But for now, this is Scott Spears heading for the dugout.